We believe the Bible is our firm foundation, the unshakable truth in a shifting world. We believe God created the heavens and the earth with power, purpose, and perfection, and He created you in His perfect image. Yes, we fall. Yes, we fail, but God refused to let sin write our story. So He sent His Son, Jesus, to rescue us from darkness and deliver us into light. The Son of Man came to bring life, abundant, overflowing, and eternal. He walked with the broken. He welcomed the outcast. And then He stretched out His arms on a cross and conquered death. And 3 days later, He rose. Now He offers life, real life, starting today. Not earned, not deserved, only received by grace. You are never too lost, never too broken, never too far gone. Through Jesus, we have the hope of heaven and peace and power for today. This, my friend, is what we believe.
Well, we're in kind of a new 2-week, we're going to stay in Luke 19 for the next 2 weeks. And partly it's this concept of generosity, which some of you think he's going to talk about money. It does have parts of that with generosity, but that's not really the thrust of what generosity is. It's a mindset. It's really a heart condition of generosity. And so some of you are going to be very familiar with this story, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time this week. You're going to have to come back for part 2 next week, mainly because that's what matters. And so I'm going to kind of go through one point, and you're not going to, if you're one of those people who likes to fill in the blank, you talk to me afterwards. We're not going to get through all the points. I'm telling you that right now. But this concept of irrational generosity, it's a heartbeat, it's a mindset, what I want to get to. And if you have your Bibles, if you turn to Luke 19, that's where we're going to be, and where I'd encourage you to read through this week and just stay in that chapter. Don't go beyond it, but stay in Luke 19 and really through verse 27. We're going to spend our time, the rest of what we have, verses 1 through 10 is where we'll find us a little bit back into chapter 18 a little bit. But what you want to know, just quick context to understand, is that this is when Jesus has set His eyes to Jerusalem. This is when He's coming to the final, His triumphal entry, where He's going to be crucified at the end of the following week. He's making His way. He has set His eyes. And what you find in Luke's gospel is that it is all about chronological order, meaning if you read about Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you will see some parallels and some similar stories. Luke actually gives it to you in what sequence of order they happened. So this story we're going to look at today is actually the right sequence of when it took place, when Jesus' ministry. And what you have to know is Jericho is where He's headed. He's sending His eyes to Jerusalem. But in chapter 19, verse 1, it says He entered Jericho and was passing through. And partly right before that, before we jump into that piece, you have to look a little bit back of chapter 17, 18 to kind of grasp what's happening. These are all kind of tied together, but in chapter 18, verse 35, it says, as He drew near, meaning just outside the city, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. And hearing a crowd going by, he inquired what this meant, and they told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. And he cried out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And what you find in verse 39, and those who were in front rebuked him, telling him to be silent. In one sense, saying, shut up. You're not worth Jesus' time. This is our city. We want to put our best foot forward. You're kind of the riffraff. Be quiet. You're not important. And so instead of listening to the crowd and what the world says, what you find in the next verse, part at the end of it, verse part B, he yells even all the louder. He cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. He didn't care what the world said to shut up and be quiet. No, he ran. He got louder and incessant with Jesus. In fact, if you go through the Hebrew at this part, he's basically saying, Yahweh, show thy grace. That's what he's claiming. And so our English translations don't always do us justice as we kind of understand it. But Yahweh, that name, that's God's name. If you go to Exodus 34, 6 and 7, you read about what God's name means. He is gracious and compassionate, so to anger and abounding in love. And he's talking, that's who he is proclaiming Jesus is God. And he's saying, have grace. But he doesn't say what it is he wants. He's just pleading. He's just, as we get to our forefront, as we heard from testimonies, you get to your knees and you just say, God, have mercy. God, have grace. And what is Jesus' response to this? And Jesus stopped and commanded him to be brought to him. This guy that's in the back, that's riffraff, that the crowd says he's not worthy of your attention, Jesus stops and he brought him to him. He says, what do you want me to do for you? Isn't it obvious? I'm blind, let me see. Like you would think Jesus can see, right? Is he blind? No. What do you want me to do? He said, Lord, let me recover my sight. Jesus said to him, recover your sight. Your faith, notice not what he did, your faith, your belief, your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise to God. And keep this story in mind. What did he do? He pleaded for grace. Jesus bestows grace. And then what does he do after that? He immediately goes before praising. His life is significantly changed and he's pivoting. How do I live this life now that I'm saved? And for him, it's going forward and praising into the city. In chapter 19, what we want to do is kind of grasp this concept as a church. This irrational generosity means that we see people, we don't just put up with them. Jesus recognized him, saw him, acknowledged him, and then asked the question, which most of us don't do. We hear someone's problem, and when we immediately go to, we have to fix the problem. And it's like, no, don't fix it. If they're talking about it, empathize. Ask some follow-up questions. Again, Jesus didn't just say, well, I see that you're blind. Is that what you want? No, he wants to hear. A lot of times people just want to hear. People just want to be seen. Why do they yell, scream, and shout on social media? Because no one's listening. And Jesus just asked the question, and then he explained what he wanted. And Jesus said, okay, you've been healed. Your faith. And so as he goes forward into the city, Jesus is entering, and the crowds are going wild because, again, 17 and 18, this is leading up to Jerusalem. In order to get to Jerusalem, everyone would be traveling there at this time because it's the Seder. It is the big deal, Passover, and everyone's required to come to Jerusalem. And so the crowds would have to pass through Jericho. So it's not just a city that's full, it's beyond full. And what's unique about Jericho is that it's probably a place where most of the priests at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem would have lived. Partly because it was about 18 miles from the city, and so you would travel there when you're off and then travel back to Jerusalem for your required needs. And what you see in 17 and 18 is that the people who should know who Jesus is, who should know about the Messiah, are the ones who miss it every time. And the ones who we would say don't get it, shouldn't understand it, they get it. The little children, they get it in chapter 18. The blind man gets it. Jesus talks to his disciples saying, hey, I'm about to go to Jerusalem. They're going to be killed. I'm going to be raised again. And they don't, what are you talking about? And so you get to 19 and he says, he entered Jerusalem and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, and he was a chief tax collector and was rich. And we probably, if you've been in church, you know the song, the phrase, Zacchaeus was a, and in the sycamore tree for the Lord he won. Good job. That's the story. And what I want to do this week is just kind of share a little bit about his background, what's happening to him, what happens to him. And next week I want to answer the question. Actually, Stacy brought it up in her own testimony. Purpose. Now what do I do? Now that salvation has found me. Now that what do I do with this? Because that's the big crux when we say, okay, come to Christ, come to Christ. Great, you're saved. Now what? Now what? And so we find that he's this chief tax collector, and from a historical piece, you just have to understand that he would have been the enemy. Okay, there's a phrase out there, figures don't lie, but liars write figures, okay? Tax collectors are good with math, right? But they are human, they're gonna lie. And that's just it, figures don't lie, liars write the figures though. And a tax collector in this day and age would say Roman would tax everything. They would say, hey, we like our federal and state. We can kind of compare and contrast this. Rome would be like the federal government. There's a tax, you have your income tax, Social Security, all that fun stuff in your paycheck. You have that from the federal. Then these tax collectors are like the state tax that's on top of the federal tax. And so you have maybe a 40% Roman tax, and then you have an additional, because when you're a tax collector, you would say, okay, Carroll County's worth X amount of money. I will pay that X amount of money. Great, now you're out of pocket. Now you need to collect X amount of money. But if you just collect X amount of money, you break even. The tax collector would say, well, now I need my own money. And they'd add on top of the tax. So you would go into Jericho knowing all my goods that I'm bringing in. It was a center of commerce going into Jerusalem. Again, all the animals for the sacrifice, all the stuff is huddling through. And so as you traveled through the gate, the tax collector said, okay, here's Rome's cut. Okay, now here's the additional 20% on top of that. So now you're out 60, 70%. And if he didn't like you, you're out more. And they would look at these tax people as you are the scum of the earth. You are rejected by family. It's a very lonely existence because you're in it for the money and you're collaborating with the enemy, which is Rome. And so this tax collector, it tells us immediately that Zacchaeus was this hated individual, that he probably had no one to celebrate the Passover feast with. And he's heard about this Jesus, and it says he was a chief and he was rich, which means he doesn't get rich by just sowing the crops and trading. It means he got it off of other people. He's manipulated and twisted. He's a hated individual. He's not nice. In fact, his name itself means pure one. That's what Zacchaeus means. And he probably wasn't all that pure. And so you have Zacchaeus who is in there. He's this chief tax collector in verse 3, and he was seeking to see who Jesus was. Again, the crowds are going. He's hearing the noise, and he's just trying to see, which one is he? My guess is Jesus probably didn't stand out in the crowd. He probably wasn't 6'8", this hulking individual. He worked construction, not just with what we say as a carpenter, but carpenters would have worked with stone a lot of times because that was the main kind of thoroughfare. And so he is not just strong, but he's probably just wiry. Again, he's in Galilee, Nazareth. They don't have all the food and all the produce. He's not eating, 7,000 calories a day he's eating what he can. It probably doesn't stand out all that much if you were to look. And so he's seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was small in stature. You ever been around a little dog? Anyone have little dogs? I call it little dog syndrome. They're ankle biters. And they go out, they yak, 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 and they run behind you, right? Because then it's like, I picked a fight and I can't do this. And so he's a tax collector. He can't see, he's hated. They probably see him in the crowd, and you probably have people like he's behind you. They're probably throwing their elbows back, like you don't know who elbowed this guy. And he's small in stature, and so he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see Jesus, for he was about to pass that way. And the sycamore trees, Jericho is known, it had a ton of trade, it had a ton of trees. It also had several of these figs, and some of the trees were just perfume, like frankincense type deal. It was a known city quality. Had its gardens. And here's the thing. He's rich, he is well-to-do. In the eyes of the Romans, he would tax you, and then he could back up. If you didn't pay that tax, he would get the soldiers and force it at the end of a knife or a sword or a spear. He's not well-liked. If he's Roman in nature, then he probably would have also had a toga. And if you have a toga, it means you have like a tunic on. That's your shoulders, like you're sleeveless and down to about your knees. And then you would have had like an 18-foot sheet wrapped very articulately around you. And it would limit how fast you could walk because you're not in a hurry. You are prestigious. You have wealth, and it was a sign of well-to-do. And so for it to say that he is rich, he's not necessarily liked, but he is well-to-do. For him to see and run ahead and climb up a tree, do you know how embarrassing? Men don't run, all right? You don't run. And here he is running. In fact, Proverbs 28:1 says, the wicked flee when no man pursueth. Okay, I'm just saying and he is running ahead to see this Jesus, to climb up this tree, to embarrass himself in a sense, all just to see, just like the blind man. I got all the louder. I can't see. No one's letting me in. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and he said to Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. He has gone in to be a guest of a man who is a sinner. And this is a big deal. Jesus has set his eyes to Jerusalem. He knows what's coming. He knows he's going to die. He knows this is where it's all culminating. And what does he do before he gets there? He stops for a blind man and then a tax collector who was the scum of the earth and lowest of low. In fact, when you read in chapter 17 and 18, you read about another tax collector who is praying to God, and he stands off to a side, bows his head, and hits his chest and pleads and humbles himself before God, praying. And you have the Pharisee, who is the religious leader of the day, who looks at them with distaste, and all of the citizens said, and he prays next to him in a loud voice saying, at least I'm not like him. And Jesus says the one who's heard is the tax collector because he's humbled himself. And here again, as he stops, the crowd would have known who he is, known his reputation. Jesus, you look at who started, who initiated? Jesus. He stopped. He looked up. He said, come down. And what was Zacchaeus' response? Hurriedly, he came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they grumbled, he has gone in to be a guest of a man who is a sinner. And I want to kind of take this a little further in this aspect because I don't think we quite grasp what's going on. In Luke's gospel, Jesus is kind of always going to dinner or leaving dinner, okay? And this is a big deal. We find this story, what we just read, heartwarming, but the people found it offensive. Why? Because meals are what anthropologist Mary Douglas called boundary markers. Meals bring people together. They also keep people apart. Think of pre-civil rights restaurants with signs on the door that said whites only. Or in the UK, no Irish, no blacks, no dogs. Even today, think of how restaurants are often stratified by class. Even in the no-brow places we tend to love, most of us eat with friends or family, people who are like us, act like us. This is true of culture. It was especially true in first century Jewish culture. They called it table fellowship. To eat with someone was a sign of welcome, not just into one's home, but also into good standing within the community and even with God himself. Hence, no self-respecting Rabbi Jesus would ever be caught dead at the table of someone like Zacchaeus. It would be the end of his career. And one theologian wrote, Jesus got himself crucified by the way he ate. He ate with all the wrong people. Turncoats like Zacchaeus, prostitutes, Gentiles, the unclean. Danger, danger. He was accused of being a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, and this was no compliment. You see, Rabbi Jesus, meals were not a boundary marker, but a sign of God's great welcome into the kingdom. Not a way to keep people out, but to invite people in. Robert Karras writes there's over 50 references of food in Luke's gospel. Luke wrote, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. That was what Jesus did. That was his mission. Then he wrote, the Son of Man came eating and drinking. That was how Jesus did it, his method. Jesus lived in a culture where a lot of people were hostile toward him. How did he invite them into his kingdom? One meal at a time. He invited himself. Why do you think we did supper club yesterday afternoon and evening? One meal. Come be a part. Come get to know. Come sit and talk and gather around the table. And that's what Jesus did here. And the crowd's just stirring, like, how could he? That's not who we would pick. Verse 8, and Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. Here's the key with that piece, that Jesus has received him. And what does Zacchaeus stand in front of the whole crowd? It's one thing to say it in private, I believe in Jesus Christ. It's another thing to go forward like people did and get in the tank in front of all of you and declare. And that's what Zacchaeus is doing. Before the crowd, he's saying, I give half of what I own. Like Jeff Bezos with his billions of dollars saying, half is gone. So you're like, it doesn't make that much of a dent. It does make a dent, but not that much. But in front of everyone, he's claiming this. And then he says, if I've defrauded, which you know he has, I will give fourfold to everyone, which if you go back into Leviticus law code, it was only twice as much. And so he's going double and above and beyond, overly generous. And what does Jesus say? Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. And real salvation means real change. This whole thing, Zacchaeus is not in his home, and salvation comes to Zacchaeus not because of what he promised to do. That's not how it came. What he would do was rather the evidence of his salvation. That irrational generosity to just give it away. And then he's got to own up to it. It's like, is he going to do it? And what we want to look at next week is, again, Jesus hasn't had the meal yet. And what you find in this next parable that we're going to look through next week in verses 11 through the chapter, or through verse 27, is his, how do we live in the here and the now? Because you see Zacchaeus immediately, the generosity piece in his heart is opened. And can you imagine him going to doors and knocking and saying, hey, who's at the door, honey? Oh, it's Zacchaeus. Oh, didn't you pay the tax man? Yeah, I paid the tax man. Well, why is he there? I don't know why he's there. How many people are with him? Does he have soldiers? Is he going to take it all? No, it's just him. You open the door and hand you a bag of gold. Here you go. Well, what's he want? Well, he handed me some gold. Well, why did he do that? I don't know. But everything he took is back plus some. And it wasn't because, again, that's a byproduct of the obedience of following after salvation has come. Then he does. And that's what we're called, is to yield. Romans 5 says that we are justified by his death. How much more are we then to live through his resurrection, through his life? And that's what we're going to look at next week, is what does that mean? And he's going to speak about this in terms that Zacchaeus would understand and Zacchaeus would resonate very much with. And it's different when you read it's the parable of the 10 minas. You're like, isn't that Matthew? It's different than the parable of the talents. That's different. In this parable, everyone's given the same amount. And we're going to look at that. We're going to see, how do we live in the here and the now? Because Jesus said, I'm coming back again. And everyone at this stage of the game would have said, Messiah is coming right now. And Jesus is saying, not yet. And in between the now and not yet, what do we do? In 8 years, it'll be 2,000 years from Jesus' resurrection. Are we on point? Are we on mission? Are we seeing new life in Christ? Are we doing our part? Are we living our faith? Because real salvation does. It means real fame, real quick. New goals and values. It means it starts at home. So far as it depends upon you, that's what's going to happen. That real change is going to be new goals and values. It's going to start at your home. And so far as it depends upon you, you can write Romans 12 there. It changes. And you should see the change. And it won't be all at once. Sometimes that happens. More often than not, it's a slow and steady, faithful change, consistency. So let's pray this morning. God, we are grateful to be here and to hear testimonies, Lord, of people's new life in you. The old has gone, the new has come. And even to see it right here in Luke 19 of, Lord, a blind man's life totally changed with faith in you. Zacchaeus' life totally changed with faith in you. And what do we do with that, Jesus? How do we live in the present? And we've yielded our life to you, Jesus, but our circumstances maybe haven't changed a whole lot. Relationships, job, kids, work, all of these things are still vying for our attention and pressures. How do we live in the here and the now? And so will we trust you, Jesus, in the here and the now? Will we be faithful each day to make the next best right decision? For those here in the room, Jesus, whose heart have been softened, who maybe desire that faith, allow them not to leave without yielding to you. Maybe there's people in here, Lord,